Hello, everyone. This is Pastor Matthew Bennett from Living Faith Christian Church, Collingwood, Ontario. If you've been following our live broadcasts on our page, you'll notice that we were not live on our page this morning. That's because we had our first in-person gathering, and that was actually last night. In my yard, and we talked about in my backyard at my home, and we talked about what the next steps for us as a church can look like and how everybody can be involved. And so I want to take a moment to also share what my comments were last night and what we can look forward to in the remaining months of this year. So I hope you're doing well. Thank you to those of you who are watching live. I see a few people here, and we're really glad that you're here. And to everybody who'll be watching the recording later, we're just really blessed to have all of you participate and be a part of things in whatever way it might be. As we gathered in my yard last night, and I'm really blessed to have a large space to be able to gather in safely, and we had nice weather last night, I shared these words about faithfulness in a time of disruption, and I just want to share them with you as well. I want to explain first what I mean by disruption. When we first ceased gathering in person on Sundays back in March, I thought this was just an interruption. Probably most of us did. An interruption brings an unexpected pause to an activity, and after the interruption, you just go back to what you were doing. It slowly dawned on me, and probably several others as Sundays rolled by, that the moment in which we are living is not an interruption. It is a disruption. A disruption is an unexpected event that changes your course of action significantly, after which you do not return to the way things were. And this can be a very good thing. You can think of examples of disruption in the business world, like Blockbuster was on the top of things until Netflix came along and disrupted the industry, or how Kodak was on top of the camera world until digital cameras came around and disrupted the photography world. Well, a disruption changes things, and we're in a time of disruption. I believe God is at work, even in this time right now, disrupting some things that maybe even needed to change and are changing for the better. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, individuals have different comfort levels and different risk levels. I've observed that an individual's comfort level does not necessarily correspond to that individual's risk level. As a result, there are those who, medically speaking, face a great risk from the virus and yet feel very comfortable gathering with other people. Conversely, there are those who are at very low risk and yet are not at all comfortable at gathering with other people. Now, neither of those positions are necessarily right or wrong, or any position on the spectrum between those 2 points. None of those positions are right or wrong, but they are real, and as such are worthy of a response. The first thing I want to make clear is we can't allow this to be an occasion for division. Let any differences we have be occasions for us to demonstrate our love for one another is based on Christ's love for us and doesn't require us to see eye to eye on every detail. As we consider the best way forward as a family of faith, let's bear in mind these two things. Number one, we don't need to see eye to eye in order to walk hand in hand. And number two, rather than being paralyzed by fear or propelled by foolishness, let us walk in the way of wisdom as we seek to honor God and make disciples. This way of wisdom is marked out for us in three ways. There are things we must do. There are things we may or may not choose to do. And then third, there are things that we must do. First, let's look at two things that we must not do. Number one, we must not harm our neighbor. Romans chapter 13 and verse 10 in the NIV says, love does no harm to its neighbor. Well, that's pretty clear and doesn't beg for a lot of interpretation. Love does no harm to a neighbor. Hey, the reality of the times in which we live are that this pandemic means any gathering of people carries with it the risk of harm to our neighbors. We must give appropriate consideration to how our gatherings will affect those for whom Christ died. So the number one thing we must not do is we must not harm our neighbor. The second thing also comes from Romans chapter 13, this time in the first verse. Romans chapter 13 and verse 1 says, let everyone be subject to the governing authorities. We can be thankful here in Simcoe County, particularly, and also here in the province of Ontario, that we have good leaders. Not perfect leaders, not leaders who always get it right, but who in this situation and time in which we live, leaders who have led well. Here's a review of some of the guidelines that govern the reopening of congregations here in the region in which we live. Face coverings must be worn by everyone inside the place of worship at all times, unless it's reasonably required to temporarily remove the face covering or for services provided by the place of worship. What that means, temporarily removed for services provided, would be like for receiving communion. Singing by participants in the service in an indoor environment continues to be prohibited at this time. COVID-19 is spread primarily through droplets. Singing by participants, therefore, is prohibited, since singing is known to increase droplet spread. Masks may be removed for the purposes of public speaking where sufficient distance is provided between the speakers and participants, and that's a distance of at least 4 meters. There's a few other details there. Suffice it to say that gatherings in our building on Sunday mornings, or whenever we would gather, will not look like they used to for some time. This is, in my opinion, not an overreach by the government in any way. Any change is awkward and difficult, I understand. But from what I know of the men and women involved in making these decisions, their motivations really do, in this case, come down to wanting to keep our community safe. Now, having said the things that we must not do, we must not harm our neighbor, and we must not disobey the authorities without a very good reason. There are times where there is a good reason. I don't believe this is one of them. Particularly because churches are not subject to restrictions that other organizations are not subject to. We're not being singled out. And it's not like we don't have other options, and we'll talk about those options. Now, having said what we must not do, let's look for a moment at things we may or may not do. These are areas of liberty and freedom. We're not bound to do them, but we're not in sin if we do not. So things we may or may not do include, as a church, having a building. We may have a building, but we don't have to. It's easy to confuse a church family with a church building. Having a church building is great, but it's not the same thing as having a church family. You know, my natural family has a home. You see behind me, actually, my home office. If we left this home, we would still be a family, though. This house exists to support our family, not the other way around. So a church may or may not have a building. A church may or may not meet in a building. As discussed in the above guidelines, and those were just the highlights, we may meet in a church building. We are allowed to. But whether we do or not, we're a church family wherever or however we meet. Jessica, my wife, and I, we both have family in Illinois, hence the Chicago Cubs t-shirt. We haven't seen them for some time. And there's no telling when we may be able to see them again. Just because we have not seen them under the same roof, because we've not been in the same building, it doesn't mean that we stopped being family. Family is not about gathering in a particular place. A church may have a building, a church may meet in a building, a church may meet online. We've had church online every week since this whole situation began. We've been live on Facebook every Sunday morning. We've had interactive Zoom meetings every Wednesday. And effective ministry does happen this way. We've seen some growth in ministry even in this time. And so thank goodness for the opportunities that we have to continue to worship in new and exciting ways. And then a church may meet in homes. I'm going to put in the notes or in the comments section under this video a link to a document that gives you 14 different verses from the New Testament that show speak to how often the church in the New Testament met from house to house or in homes. Certainly they met in public gatherings as well, but I think the record of the New Testament makes a very strong case, and I think you'll agree when you read the verses that are in the document that will eventually be below this video. As you read through those 14 scriptures, I think you'll see that the Bible makes a very clear case that the default location, the home base for church life is in the homes of the members of the church family. I believe the times in which we live are a great opportunity for us to embrace the biblical practice of hospitality. Having said things that we must not do, we must not harm our neighbor, we must not disobey authority without a good reason. We surveyed some things that we can do, but we're not obligated to. Having a building, meeting in a building, meeting online, meeting in homes. Here's some things that we must do. As Christians, these things are not optional. This list is very, very small. We're called to love God. We're called to love our neighbor, and we're called to make disciples. While this pandemic has caused us to change how we obey this call, the fact that we are called to love God, love our neighbors, and make disciples has not changed at all. In light of all this, here's what we're going to do. We will have an in-person gathering once a month on the second Sunday of the month. So our next in-person gathering will be October 11th. That's Thanksgiving Sunday. We will continue to have one in-person gathering a month, not only in October, but also November, December, and then the second Sunday in January. Hopefully by January, we'll be able to, by then we'll certainly be able to reevaluate what our meeting schedule looks like. What about the other Sundays? It would be a mistake to listen to all this and just go, oh, so we're only having church once a month. No, we're gathering in the church building one Sunday a month. We are the church wherever and whenever we are. And I really want to encourage you to consider hosting a home church. This is a very biblical thing to do. While we're in this phase of reopening here in Ontario, you are able to have a social circle of up to 10 people. I will also post the guidelines of what that looks like specifically from the province in the comments under this video. But we can have a social circle of up to 10. I want you to give serious consideration, prayerful consideration to who you can invite into your social circle. And then I want you to consider seriously how you can invite your circle into your home to host a watch party and have home church on the Sundays that we don't gather in person. We will be live streaming every Sunday. This means that those who don't feel comfortable gathering in person do not need to feel excluded. It also means that hosting church in your home is as simple as connecting to our website. So the wisest way forward then is this. one in-person gathering per month, followed by home church gatherings on the other Sundays. Home gatherings at other times, maybe you go, well, Saturday night works better for me, or a different time. Maybe your social circle wants to do a Friday night dinner and then have church with the previous Sunday's worship. That's great. I encourage Sundays, though, because then you can participate with the live stream. But most importantly, we want you to participate with one another in the place where you're gathered. 2020 has brought a great deal of change. I know change is difficult. I'm confident that this path forward is a safe and effective way for us to carry out our mission of helping people to connect to God. Even more than that, I believe that this way forward is faithful to the Word of God. If you are available on Sunday, October 11th, to join us in worship in our church building, you're more than welcome. We'll have more details as the date approaches about what steps we need to take to do that properly. And I hope that you will find a way to continue worshiping and staying connected with your faith family in home groups as we make that a key effort of reaching our community with the gospel between now and the end of this year. Pastor Jessica and I love you. We're praying for you, and we look forward to seeing you again real soon.